Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my top 100 all-killer, all-filler games. And what that means is games with simple rule sets, short durations and portable packages. The sort of games you probably don't see all that often in top 100 lists. So today we're looking at numbers 70 down to 61, and number 70 on the list is the game Peanut Club from Lumberjack's Studio. And I've already featured two games from Lumberjack's Studio on the list, which were Magic Rabbit and Oh My Brain. But this one is an auction game with the same great presentation that you saw in those previous ones, and it's a really crazy, wacky auction, okay? You've got three different currencies, so you've got a hand of cards. Some of them are camels, some of them are peanuts, and some of them are millions of dollars. And don't bank on millions of dollars being worth more than a peanut, right? Because you've got the three different currency cards and they keep switching positions. So sometimes peanuts are worth more than camels, and sometimes camels are worth more than millions of dollars, but that can be reversed throughout the game. Each round you turn over, or each turn you turn over a number of item cards with beautiful illustrations from this deck, and they've got different symbols on them, different colours. You want to gather these things so that you can have pairs of matching colours, and some of them are special ones. You've got your own character who's got their own unique colour that they want as well, and things like that. There's going to be end game scoring based on building up sets. But what it's all about is the auction, and this is a straight up shout out how much you want to bid sort of auction. So I'll bid one camel, well I'll bid two camels, I'll bid three camels, well I'll bid one peanut, and we know the peanut is worth more than the camels right now, so now we're bidding in peanuts. And you might get to a situation where somebody's bid, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 million dollars, and then somebody else says, well I'll bid one peanut, and that one peanut is worth more than any total of millions of dollars. So it's a crazy system, but it works really well, and then it's made even more chaotic by the fact that every player has a collection of different special abilities. Everyone has the same, and these are single use, but when you use them they can change which currency is worth more. It can limit you to using only a certain type of currency in an auction, or it can make all your cards down so they're only got a value of 1 irrespective of what's written on them. And I say they're single use, but actually at a certain point in the game, and you don't know when it's going to happen, a card comes out the deck which resets all your abilities so you can use them again. So you may get a second use out of some of these. It's really chaotic. It's really fun and funny as well. It's got some great artwork. I mean, if you don't like chaos, don't go for this one. This is not a Reiner Knizia auction, right? This is a crazy shout it out and have a laugh. I think it's great. Peanut Club, really highly recommended. Number 69 is one of Helvetique's little tiny box games, and this one's called Misty, and it's a pick and pass game in the same sort of style as things like Sushi Go or Seven Wonders, where you've got a hand of cards, you're going to keep one, you're going to pass the rest on, and each of these cards has a little drawing on it, as if it's been drawn with a finger on a condensation on a mirror or something like that. That's why it's called Misty. So you've got these little sort of childish drawings. But the card that you take goes into a grid that you lay out on the table, and the position is really important because they've all got little symbols on them, arrows and things like this. So at the end of the game, your card is going to follow the arrows. So you'll choose one of the cards to activate in your grid, and it might shift to the left. That might mean it now covers another card. So you're going to pick carefully where you're going to start with moving stuff around. And if you don't cover the monster's going to eat your plants, but you don't want that to happen because the plants are worth points. You want to get smiley faces next to each other and all that sort of stuff to maximize your scoring at the end of the game. So a nice simple drafting, pick and pass drafting mechanism, but at the end a very simple little positional puzzle going on as well. Really good, really fun, simple game, great for families, great for kids, but actually engaging and enjoyable for adults as well. Number 68 was a game that got an awful lot of buzz this last year, and that's Scout. And I think it mainly got the buzz for two reasons. One is that it was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres award, which is hugely prestigious, right? And the second reason is because it's from Oink Games, and their games tend to have, they've just got a little sort of trendy, aren't they? They're so stylish. They're so the graphics and the design of the box and everything like that is so stylish. Scout is an interesting climbing game, really. So what I mean by that is you're trying to play cards that are higher than the cards that have been played before, but it's got a few really interesting little mechanisms in it. Firstly, each card has 2 numbers on it, and the card can be reversed one side up to the other to change the number on it. So at the start of the game, you're given a hand of cards, and you're not allowed to change the orientation of any individual card, but you could choose to flip your entire hand upside down. So basically you've got a choice of, do you want all your cards one way up, or do you want them all the other way up? So that's the first interesting twist in the game. Then you've also got this thing where you can, if you're playing groups of cards, you can play a single card you can play just from your hand, but a group of cards, if you're playing that, like a run of cards or a pair of cards, they must be next to each other in your hand, and you're never allowed to change the position of the cards in your hand. They must stay in the same order that they're there. So that's an intriguing bit to it as well. So you've got to play higher than the previous person's played. So let's say they've played a pair of 7s, well, you could play a pair of 8s or something like that. Or you could play potentially play a run or something like that, but with more cards in it. So you might play a run of 3 consecutive cards. And when you do this, when you play cards, you then take the cards that you've beaten and put them into your scoring pile, and your card becomes the active set. Now, if you can't play a card that beats the previous pile, what you do is you take one of the cards from that display, from their little set, and you position it into your hand wherever you like. And at this point, you can flip it up one side or the other, and you slot it into your hand wherever you like to try and build these sets of consecutive numbers or matching numbers, you know, right next to each other in your hand. And if nobody manages to play after you've played your set, and it comes back round to you, then the round ends and you score points for the cards that you have in front of you and stuff like that. There are also tokens that you gain whenever anybody takes a card from your active set, and these are worth points as well. So it's got some complexity and some interesting little bits in it. It feels like many of the games in the Amigo Spieler range that come out, and you'll be seeing more of these throughout the list. You've already seen quite a lot over the last few 10 so far, but this is a really good one, so that's Scout. Number 67 is another game from Amigo Spieler. This is not a tiny little card game like the games I've tended to show from them. This is a slightly larger box, and it's full of plastic cups of different colours. This is speed cups. And what you do, it's very, very simple. I always think this is a great game because you don't actually have to teach the rules. You can just see it in action and you know what you're supposed to do. So you turn over a card, it's got an image on it of a bunch of, I don't know, it could be anything, a bunch of different coloured monkeys standing in a row. And you have to get the same coloured cups as the monkeys and then just line them up as you saw on the picture. Sometimes they have to be stacked on top of each other, sometimes they just have to be lined up, and you just got to do it faster than anyone else and then hit the bell. And if you do that, you win the card. You work through the deck, and then whoever's got the most cards at the end wins. Really, really simple stuff, fast and frantic. You're either going to love it or hate it. Kids are going to love it. And it's just great for that reason that I mentioned, that you don't even have to teach the rules. No one ever taught me to play speed cups, right? I just saw someone playing it at Essenspiel and I knew what was going on straight away. And I think there are very few games where you can say that about them. Number 66 is another game that was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres a few years ago. This is Llama, which is a game from Amigo Spieler, small box game. This one from Rainer Knizia, and it's a bit like Uno, which is not necessarily a huge positive for a lot of people. A lot of people are quite disdainful of that game, but Llama's got a little bit more thought going on in it. So essentially a card is played, and then you have to play a card equal to that or higher. The highest card is a 6, and so if you're going to play higher than a 6, there is no 7, you've got to play a llama, and then if you want to beat a llama, you've got to play a 1, okay? So it goes round, full circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, llama, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you play your card on top of it, and you keep going like that until you decide you can't play, or you find you're unable to play, in which case you pass. And when you pass, you're going to put your cards on the table, and they're going to be worth negative points, equal to the value on the card. So a 5 is worth 5 negative points. But if you've got a group of 5, let's say you've got 4 5s, that's still only worth 5 negative points, okay? You don't get, you only pay for the value of one of them. And you're going to take these points as tokens. And then in future rounds, if you win rounds, you can get rid of tokens and things like this. But the great thing about it is when you stop playing, just because you've passed and everybody else has passed, if there's one player who's left, they can keep on playing. So sometimes it's good to actually build up these groups of cards so that then you can just wait until everyone else has passed and you've stayed in, and then you can just play, right, 1, 5, another 5, another 5, another 5, a 6, another 6, a llama, a 1, you know, and you can clear out your hand, and then you can get rid of big tokens. You've got this nice little system where some of the tokens are worth 1 point, and then you can change them for a 10 pointer. So if you've got, there's kind of a catch-up mechanism really, because if you've got loads of negative points, and at the end of the round you can give up 1 token, well, if you've got loads of points, you can give up a 10-point token, right? Whereas somebody who's got very few points, negative points. They're only going to be able to give up a 1 because they probably don't have 10 points worth of tokens. So it's got just some neat little clever things, as you'd expect from Reiner Knizia. I think it's great. It's really, really fun, simple, easy to teach, attractive. You know, it's worth looking at if you want something with just a little bit, just a tiny bit more bite to it than Uno. Number 65 is Kings and Creatures, this one from Zoc Verlag. Fairly recent one, for the last year or two from Zoc Verlag. This is a drafting game where, not a pick and pass drafting like we've seen before, this is open drafting where a bunch of cards are laid out on the table and we're going to select them to try and build up sets which are going to score us points. But the key in this one is that each of you starts with like a little castle that's got a number on it, and the player with the lowest number is the first one to play. And so they select another card from the open display and they put that alongside their castle. But that's got a number on it as well. And every single turn we look around the table and we go, right, who's got the lowest number? They're going to be the next person to play. And so you might actually end up getting multiple turns in a row before anyone else gets a turn, because you keep taking low numbers and adding them to your display while somebody else is jumping way ahead and getting a really high number, which means they're going to be waiting a while for their turn, but they got the card that they wanted. You bow out of the round as soon as you've got 3 cards. You can't ever take more than 3 cards in a round. Or if you ever take a card which is lower than the number that you had previously. Okay, that's going to knock you out of the round. But that's quite a good thing to do, because that means going into the next round, you're going to have a low number in front of you, which means you're going to start playing first and taking things first. At the end of each round of play, you compare to your neighbours how many soldiers you've got, and that's going to score you points. And then at the end of the game, you're comparing how many cards of a certain colour you've got to the left and right of you. You're taking different points for different sets. You've got set collection bonuses, all this sort of stuff like you'd see in a game like Sushi Go or something like that. So it's sort of like a card game version of a time track, like you'd see in Tokaido or Glenmore or you know, those games where, or Patchwork, games where you can jump quite far ahead and then it means you're waiting a few times to get your turn, but you got the thing that you wanted, right? So that's what Kings and Creatures is, and it's a really nice, clever, a little bit different sort of drafting game from Zoc. Number 64 is Chip It. Now, Chip It has a very similar feel to something like Scout, which I've mentioned before, but Chip It, totally under the radar. I've never heard anybody else mention Chip It before, but I think it's great, Chip It. What you essentially do, it's another climbing game. You're playing cards to beat the card that was played previously, or the combination of cards that was played previously. But in Chip It, you can adjust the value of your cards to find these pairs. So let's say you've got a 7 and you've got a 5. Well, you can adjust that 5 to make it a 7, so you can play a pair. But in order to do that, you have to take chips from the central display, and you don't want chips really, okay? But you can take them, and one of the colours, taking a chip, is just going to increase it by 1, right? Whereas another coloured card, taking a chip, is going to double the value of it. And so there's some real sort of decisions to make around that sort of stuff. And then when you pass, when you're unable to play or you pass, then you give up chips. Okay, so that's the point where you can start to get rid of your chips. But ultimately you want to end the game with no cards, no chips. That's how you're going to win the game. There's quite a bit of maths going on here, because you've got to work out, right, well, if I multiply this by 2 or even by 3 by playing a couple of chips, you know, what happens there? How can I match that up with another card in order to play higher than somebody else? But that's going to be giving me lots of chips, lots of that sort of decision making going on. I think it's really clever. It's not the most intuitive game in the world, but yeah, it's well worth exploring, and I think more people should be talking about it. Number 63 is Stich Meister from Friedemann Fries. This is another Amigo Spieler game. So Stich Meister is a trick-taking game, very simple trick-taking game actually, you know, simple play a card, follow suit. There might be a trump suit in there, something like that. Seems simple enough, right? It's like any other trick-taking game. But here we have an enormous deck of cards that all have different rules on them. And at the start of each round, every player gets 3 of these cards, and they can select one rule which they're going to put into play. So each round you can have multiple rules in effect that totally change the way the game works. It's a bit like playing Flux, okay, but as a trick-taking game. So you've got really wildly different rounds. It alters the scoring of the tricks, it alters the way that a trick works, it alters who plays next, it alters, you know, all sorts of things get changed. Now this game's only available in German, so if you want to play it, I mean, you can find nice crib sheets on Board Game Geek with all the English information on there. I've pasted mine up so that there is, the rules are sort of stuck on the cards. And it's chaotic and it's not entirely fair, okay? It's hard to create a set of rules for every situation that's going to be completely balanced and all that sort of thing. So you've got to play it lightheartedly with a little bit of pinch of salt, It doesn't really matter who wins or loses. It's the fun of seeing how all these different systems work together. Actually, this game was a big inspiration for my game Throne, which is my dice. It's a trick-taking game that uses dice, but every round there are different powers in effect. And a lot of the powers were inspired by things that happen in Stich Meister. So it was a bit of an inspiration on me. And actually, we've later seen Friedemann Friese, a few years later, go on to create his massive game 504. Was it 504 or 501? I think it was 504, which just was a board game that had so many different mix and match rules. Very experimental design of Friedemann Friese. And Stich Meister, much simpler, easier, small package than 504. It's similar to, I understand, the game Dwarf King from Yellow, which I really ought to play. I think that's probably right up my street, but I haven't come across it yet. But I'd like to see an English translation of Stich Meister at some point, but it's been years. Who knows? Number 62 is Kingdomino, a Spiel des Jahres winner from Bruno Cathala and the publisher Blue Orange Games. This is a game where you've got domino tiles with 2 squares on them, and each square represents a different type of terrain, a different coloured terrain. And when you take a domino, you've got to fit it into your 5x5 grid, or you could play with a slightly larger grid if you want to. But you've got to match terrain types with each other so that you're building these bigger areas of terrain. At the end of the game, you're going to score 1 point for each square of terrain, multiplied by the number of, I think they're crowns that are in these different terrain areas. So you want to gather the crowns, but also build them up into these big areas of matching colours. But the most interesting thing in the game is the way that you get these dominoes, because at the start of each round, a number of them are laid out, and on the back of the dominoes, they've got numbers on them, which tells you the sort of order of them, okay, the priority order of them. When you take one of these dominoes, you place your token in that spot, so that at the end of the round, when everyone's taken a token, you're taking a domino, your tokens are positioned in a certain order, and that's going to dictate the player order, the turn order for the next round. So basically, when you're selecting a domino, you're selecting the domino that you want, yeah, to fill your grid effectively, but also your position in turn order for the next round. And that's the most interesting thing in the game. That's the key decision in it. Really interesting system, huge success. I mean, it won the Spiel des Jahres, but then went on to have lots of sequels and expansions, Queen Domino and Dragomino and Kingdomino Origins, all these other versions of the game, which I really need to explore. But Kingdomino, lovely little filler, looks like a children's game, but actually there's enough substance here that you can play this with adults as well and have a good time. Number 61 is Deep Sea Adventure, which is another game from Oink Games. Now, Oink Games makes these lovely little stylish games like we've seen previously with Scout. This one is a push your luck game where we're in a submarine and we've got to dive to try and get treasure. So there's this little chain of treasure tokens extending down the table from the submarine, and you don't know the value of these tokens. It's a roll and move game. So you roll some dice and then you move your little diver a few spaces down onto the, according to the dice roll, and then you pick up the treasure that you've got there. Now, on subsequent turns, your treasure, the number of treasure tokens you've got, is going to reduce the oxygen available to all players. And at a certain point, you're going to be thinking, I can't really afford to go any deeper into this ocean because we're running out of oxygen and I've got to get back to that submarine before the oxygen runs out. So you're rolling dice now to try and get back up to the submarine, but the trouble is the treasures that you're carrying are weighing you down, okay? So the number of treasures you're carrying is subtracted from your dice roll. So it's a real element of how much risk can I take, how far can I push it in terms of going to the depths where the bigger treasures are, which are worth more points. Or do I want to just take a few simple treasures and then get back up to the top and hope that the other players perish and end up getting nothing? So exciting little push your luck game in a tiny, tiny package. Very, very popular, this one, Deep Sea Adventure. So that's 70 to 61, and as always we're going to look at patterns and see if there's been any upsets, right? Has anybody risen up and taken the lead? So starting with designers, how many games by these designers have there been in the list so far? Okay, so we've done 40 games so far. So Reiner Knizia has taken the lead. So Reiner Knizia currently has 3 games. 3 games for Reiner Knizia. Actually hasn't got the lead. Bruno Catala also has 3 games. Actually, there's a newcomer to the, and you may not have heard of this designer, it's Haim Shafir, but one of those designers that you just don't hear anything about, even though they're relatively prolific. If we move on to looking at publishers, Amigo Spieler's taken the lead. 8 games from Amigo Spieler on my list. There's 6 games from Zoc Verlag, and that means NSV is now falling behind with 3 games on my list. In terms of themes, well, abstract themes are ahead, you know, with games like Chip It and stuff like that, which don't have any themes. So there's 11 games that are abstract. But it's a bit more interesting to look at the games that do have themes, and anthropomorphic animals. We've got 7 games with anthropomorphic animals on the list. Next most popular is fantasy games, games based around generic sort of fantasy. We've got 4 of them on the list, and then 3 farming games. And in terms of game mechanisms, well, dice rolling is in the lead with 6, but trick taking is close behind with 5 games on the list. Climbing, also 5 games. I thought that one must be high on the list. I feel like I've been saying a lot, this is a climbing game, this is a climbing game. So trick taking and climbing are level pegging, and actually they're very similar sort of mechanisms. If you like trick taking, you probably like climbing, okay? They're very similar and they appeal to the same sort of people. What's next? Shedding, that's pretty much the same as climbing. Shedding and climbing tend to go hand in hand. I've actually made a video previously about the difference between trick taking, climbing and shedding. So if you're interested, you could watch that. Okay, I'll put a link to it above. And beyond that, Push Your Luck, 4 games. And then we're into all the other types, including roll and writes with 3, games with modular rule sets, there's 3 of them, party games, pick and pass, and so on, which have got 2 games apiece. So I hope you found this 10 interesting. I hope it introduced some games to you that you hadn't heard of, that you might want to look at, and I'll see you next time for another 10 games.